So Best of Both Worlds was made for the end of Season 3, and with it, the first Star Trek season-ending cliffhanger. This took the place of the intended season-ending cliffhanger, Redemption, which thus became the Season 4 cliffhanger. So we approached the end of Season 5, and the opinion among the staff was, no cliffhanger. We already did it twice because we had them both planned out for that. Let's not go and make this a thing, alright? Everybody agree? Good. Alright, so today we're going to talk about the Season 5 ending cliffhanger story, Time Zero. This wasn't intended, but there was fear that the arrival of DS9 would make TNG basically feel irrelevant, so to try to help with that, they made this into a two-part episode, and with the time travel stuff, well, that seemed like something that could really make this thing work. TNG had played with time before, sure. Time squared will always have Paris cause and effect that had all these little displacements in time as part of the story. And Captain's Holiday had visitors from the future. Yesterday's Enterprise, in a matter of time, even had visitors from the past. But a story of our crew traveling to the past, like Tomorrow is Yesterday or City on the Edge of Forever, well, that was something that had never been done. After all, they had the holodeck to do period pieces, so it had never really seemed necessary. But now, the time seemed ripe for them to do this, and it was where numerous successful stories had gone before, after all, and that reasoning caused it to be constantly recurring throughout the rest of the franchise. Janeway having to deal with a cartoon capitalist in the 90s, Archer facing down time-traveling space Nazis, and Cisco ensuring the existence of the Federation by punching unemployment in the face. But let's get to the episode's start to see how they're going to handle this. The Enterprise is called back to Earth because of a discovery that says that aliens had been on Earth 5 centuries ago. After all, they found a pair of glasses and a gun in a cave. If that's not evidence, I don't know what is. What convinces them that these aliens who love their firearms is tech waves that the Federation wouldn't use because, tech. Picard points out that this is fascinating, but we kind of work in space. Why would you call us to come look at this cave on Earth? Well, time for the reveal, and it's... Yeah, that one actually called for a real dun-dun-dun that time. By the way, I discovered the second result for typing in murder, dun-dun-dun into Google is for a funeral home. I have no punchline for that. It was just not what I was expecting. In fact, it was such a surprise I expected a tiny little dun-dun-dun to show up when I saw that. But yes, as far as starting the season-ending cliffhanger episode goes, good move. Definitely has our interest, and that of the crew.
Data, is this yours?
Didn't I tell you to put your head away when you were done playing with it? Picard naturally wants to know if it's Lore's, but Data says they have different components, despite the fact that Soong had said that the only difference between the two was in programming.
It has a Type L phase discriminating amplifier. Mine is a Type R. Type R? Yes, sir.
Type R killed my brother once. Despite Riker's protests, Data points out that whatever the feelings related to the manor are, this is his head from 500 years ago, meaning at some point he's going to go back in time and die, and that just can't be prevented. But Geordi has an important discovery from those artifacts. Jargon tech, something shapeshifters jargon tech.
It's a cellular fossil, which might have been along just for the ride.
A cellular fossil?
Captain, why are you repeating everything we say? Why are you repeating everything I say? Huh? Severed head, severed head, severed head! Well, we'll have to look for evidence here to see who might have been responsible. The list of suspects in Data's beheading was pretty long. Which one of those could it be, though? That's the question. The answer lies on the planet Davidia 2, but first, they take the time to actually explore the implications of finding Data's severed head. I like this, the fact that they have to come face to face with a demonstration of Data's mortality has really shaken things up, but Data himself takes comfort in knowing that he won't have to spend the rest of eternity making friends and then watching them die. It's a topic that really demands a great deal of respect.
That sounded like a very intense discussion.
Yeah. They found Data's head a mile beneath San Francisco.
Or to be said in the most ridiculous-sounding manner possible. But aside of Geordi's inability to preface the bizarre remark with, "You're not going to believe this, but..." the exploration of this is interesting, like Data's observation that people suddenly stop talking when he appears now. It's long enough to give it a proper acknowledgement, and yet it's brief enough not to bog down the story, and it fits organically into the story's structure. They finally get to the planet and discover an area that shows signs of temporal goofiness, so they plan to head down there, but not Data, despite being the most qualified person to really do this.
Captain, there is no rational justification for this course.
Then I'll be irrational.
On the contrary, Data, there is every rational reason. The whole purpose of this trip is to explore a connection between this planet and a site where we found your head, and presumably the place you would die. If there is a connection there, then it's entirely possible this is the time when you're going to be brought to that site. But Data's position is that even so, they can't cheat fate. The event cannot be prevented because it has already happened. Time travel stories are a bit of a mixed bag. Some are like The Voyage Home, where it's meant to be funny. Others are like First Contact, where it's meant to be serious. But what it really comes down to is, well, let me perhaps try to illustrate what I mean.
And now I, the amazing Maurice, shall cause the girl to disappear. Alec, over. No, on the spot. That spot. Damn humidity. Make her dress disappear.
Hey, shut...
Folks, I didn't want to have to do this, but I must call upon an even greater force from beyond to accomplish this transformation of reality. The great Yog Sothoth. So please, ladies and gentlemen, just for your own safety, turn around and close your eyes, because one glimpse will drive the unprotected mind mad. That's right, yes. The horror, the mind-bending horror. Son of a bitch is stuck, isn't it? Just go over there. Yeah, that's fine. Behold! You can turn around now. Yes, turn around and behold! She is gone! Magic!
I did that because I think that time travel stories are a lot like a magic trick. The audience knows that you're doing something impossible and kind of silly, but they want you to fool them anyway because it's all fun. If you want to succeed, you need to do one of two things. Either do the trick brilliantly so the audience is just amazed with what you've done, or if you can't quite manage that, then so entertain them in the process so that even if it's not the best trick in the world, they won't mind. And of course, the best magicians are the ones that can do both at the same time. The time travel magic trick is one that writers often want to do because that's a trick that brings the house down. But so often they can't do it well, and the story that they want isn't terribly interesting, so the result winds up being a disaster. There's nothing wrong with a time travel story, but you have to be smart about it because, like a trick, if people like it, they're going to talk about how they think it was done later on. And one thing that can ruin the magic is that they can see right through it. The mixed success of time travel stories over the franchise has partially been due to the inconsistencies. You know, what is interfering? I mean, sometimes it's like Relativity, where there's nary a shit to be given and only succeeds because it's so brazen and how ridiculous it is that you just kind of have to admire it. Time Zero is going for a different take, arguably one of the harder takes to do with it, because it's going to use that idea of fate. Now, it's an awkward word to use because that implies some kind of force or something that is compelling you to action, and that's not really the case. In these kinds of stories, it's that this is the choice that you must make, but not because you're compelled to. It's because when the moment arrives, that is simply what you will choose. And so you must do it, because you must do what you choose. That might sound rather strange. It just means that you have free will and destiny at the same time without conflict. You're choosing what to happen, but from the perspective of the universe, if you will, you've already made the decision. It's already known how that is all going to play out. You're just fulfilling the role in it. But that role is one you have written for yourself. You're not under anyone else's control. This is not fate dictating what you're going to do. This is fate aware of the decision you will make. And this idea is in some ways explored in other episodes later on, time and again, where the question of changing course to avoid the time loop might be the thing that causes the time loop. And in All Good Things, that it could be Picard's inaction is the thing that dooms humanity. You got to be wary of attempts to cheat fate, or, to make it sound less mystical, to cheat history. But that's what they're going for here. A closed time loop. Things don't contradict themselves in this story. Everything plays out as it was before we started the episode and after the episode is finished as far as history goes. No alterations. That is Data's severed head, and there is no way of avoiding the fact that it's going to wind up in a cave. And thinking of it as a time loop is kind of fitting because it fits in with a cryptic remark that Guinan had made earlier, a bemused full circle. I wonder what that means. As they scan the place, the planets align and Troy is allowed to state something besides the obvious. She says that she can sense hundreds of people, terrified humans, despite this being an empty cave. The only way to get to the bottom of this is to sync up with the time that is being occupied by these denizens, and only Data has the tech jargon thingy to pull that off. He sets up a way to broadcast with his comm badge so that when he does that he can fill them in on what he sees, and it's a very effective scene. Data vanishes and his distant echoing voice describes what he sees. Bizarre aliens that are ingesting energy fragments, and 2 aliens that are near a caged Ophidian, and some kind of disaster, and he vanishes. Data has been displaced in time. Not certain what to do, he starts questioning the only one who will talk to a strangely dressed foreigner, and that's a street bum claiming to be a 49er. But I have my doubts. Kansas City Chief, maybe. That I might buy. He'll need someone a bit more helpful than just general panhandling advice, so he checks out a hotel where he quickly goes for a clever disguise.
I am a Frenchman.
And that's just an easy answer to all questions, isn't it? I'm foreign. But even a Frenchman needs money, so he tries to get work at the hotel, but seems they're not hiring. Yeah, I remember the signs up all that time that said French need not apply. But there is a poker game, and he has had a wee bit of practice. They're suspicious of this man that they think is an Easterner. Whether he means the Far East or the American East Coast, he doesn't say, but it doesn't matter because Gul Dukat likes Data and allows him to get into the game. He uses his comm badge for currency. Well, how does he do? Well, he does so well that not only does he have money now, but clearly he has gone into pimping. I do hope for both our sakes you do better tomorrow, Candy, for neither of us wishes the Data to slap a bitch. The bellhop's impressed not only with Data outplaying the card sharps, but also his generosity, so he's happy to become his sort of Man Friday for this project, to try to contact the Enterprise. Of course, Data keeps that little fact to himself. Not that he's worried about frightening off the bellhop, it's just that he'd probably pester Data to tell him which pony to bet on. But on the whole, this whole time-traveling thing is going all right. I mean, there's nothing ominous, except for the couple with the snake who suck out the soul of the 49er. What does that mean? We'll check back in on Thursday and find out. While Data's been busy pimping in the naughty 90s, the Enterprise crew is discussing what to do next, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of information to form a plan. After some prompting from Picard, Geordi says that he might be able to build something that could duplicate what happened at Data, but he's not optimistic. But this is Star Trek, so don't worry. Even stuff unlikely to work will usually work without any beta testing. At least Worf's on hand to offer this cheery thought.
If we find Commander Data, it may be our fate to die with him in the past. If our remains are in that cavern, they would have turned to dust long ago.
Oh, thanks. I'm feeling much better now. Guinan calls Picard down to show off her bartending skills.
You want the temperature where the liquid goes to vapor to be 1/2 degree below the body temperature of the customer. That way, when the liquid touches the tongue, it evaporates.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
And the flavor is carried entirely by the vapor. A few molecules off, the vapor point crashes, and poof, it's all gone.
Brings a tear to me eye. I like this, by the way. Nice little bit of alien flavor. No pun intended. Guinan also says, by the way, you need to go on that extremely dangerous away mission. Pass that salt stuff.
Do you remember the first time we met?
Of course.
Don't be so sure.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I just mean, if you don't go on this mission, we'll never meet.
And here's where that fate thing comes back into it. Picard is going to go back in time, as demanded by history, but not because it is demanded by history. It's his choice. He says he thinks his presence is vital, and that's all there is to it. I mean, sure, it could be because he's concerned about history, but that is still his choice that he is making. He is not being compelled into an action that he didn't necessarily want to take. It's an interesting counterpoint, actually, to Guinan's role in yesterday's Enterprise, where she had to convince Picard that the way things were was wrong, and to do nothing would leave history broken. But now she's telling Picard that the way things are is right, and to do nothing would break history. In the past, Data's working on making whatever the hell this is, and it requires an anvil. So I think we can make an educated guess as to what's happening here. He's going to use this device to create an irresistible pull for the Ophidian, and use that to make the aliens run straight into a tunnel that he's painted on a cliffside. Only when they run, it will actually turn into a tunnel, and when he goes to inspect it, that's when the anvil falls on his head. And that's how his head will wind up in the cave. It all fits! But plans may change because in the newspaper wrapping, he discovers a story about a literary event with a picture of Guinan attending. Said event is when we meet Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, and I will thus refer to him by that name for the remainder of the review. Twain's played by none other than Deep Throat from The X-Files, and I could tell within moments despite the makeup. His cadence is remarkable despite the Mark Twain voice he's using. I don't know why. I've heard this same impression from Mark Twain many times before, and I'm not an expert in film or anything. I don't know. Did somebody do a definitive Twain at some point and everybody's just kind of following in his footsteps? I don't get it. All I know is everybody seems to think that Mark Twain will talk with this slightly elevated voice and an odd rhythm that only succeeds in making one of the giants of American literature sound like somebody pulling anal beads out of a sheep. They actually recorded Mark Twain's voice, but he listened and said it was crap and he had the recordings destroyed. I guess that's just desserts for destroying history.
Distinguished natural philosopher has reaffirmed our planet as the only habitable globe in the heavens.
And again, maybe he just talked that way to mess with people. I mean, we are talking about a guy who wrote a children's classic with over 200 instances of the N-word in it. He doesn't actually use the word in the episode, though. Probably because spouting that with his weird voice would make him sound like some gangster rapper that suffered a stroke. In a rare moment for a man that Mystery Science Theater 3000 once presented in a skit as incapable of emoting even slightly, Jerry Hardin really chews the scenery as Twain, and he waxes on about man's place in the universe, with Guinan doing her best to try to rein his performance with her own subtlety. It's an interesting debate if you can get past Twain's performance of it, but alas, Data arrives, assuming that Guinan had traveled back in time, also from the Enterprise. At the mention of starships, though, she quickly takes him aside to talk in private. She actually thinks that he's from her father. It doesn't sound like she ran away or anything like that because she mentions that she's not done listening to, and we don't know because Data cuts her off. But he explains that he's from the future and was brought back here because aliens are threatening 19th century Earth. But things get awkward when it's revealed that Mark Twain's been eavesdropping the whole time, so now that will mean that he's going to have to join Data and Guinan on their journey of the prancing pony to meet Gandalf. As Geordi has everyone set up the stuff in the cave for this magic carpet ride, Picard arrives to announce that he's coming and Worf is staying behind. Convenient because he's got that whole I don't look human thing going on, which always matters in a time travel story, right? One thing's for sure though, this now definitely means that Worf will not be turning to dust in that cave, right? Then again, I suppose it's hard to know that today is a good day to die when time traveling, right? Could be a really bad day for it. Could be free ice cream day, and that, in my opinion, is never a good day to die.
No, it's not. Why'd you have to go and ruin free ice cream day, Grandma?
So they slide into the proper time frame or whatever and start to see the things that Data was describing. And Troy realizes that she wasn't sensing live humans, but the imprint of the last moments of human life. They all died in terror and presumably with no ice cream. Two aliens arrive through a rift and deliver more of these, and one of them is holding an Ophidian that seems to be creating the time rips, and our crew follows through for our Season 5 cliffhanger. Let's hold our applause till the end. Part 2 picks up with Mark Twain, still dressed like Colonel Sanders and still talking like a Skeksis during childbirth, giving an interview to a reporter who looks just like Jerry Taylor's son, talking about time travel.
I have just learned that even now there are people from the future right here in San Francisco. And I have no doubt that their intent is to foul our world just like my Yankee did in King Arthur's time.
So you caught the part about them being time travelers, but missed all that stuff they said about them trying to stop hostile aliens, huh? The episode's called Time's Arrow because it sounds better than the more apt title, Samuel Clemens' Bloody Nuisance. The main party are in disguise, trying to get to the bottom of this hostile alien thing, so they start with a cholera outbreak. There are too many deaths for the disease, according to Dr. Crusher, because it's not that virulent. Actually, untreated cholera kills about half the people it infects, but then I'm wondering if cholera was a last-minute change to the story, and this was supposed to be tuberculosis, because people are going on about this coughing thing, and that's not a symptom of cholera. You have this ass-rupturing diarrhea, and you puke a lot. But TB was a major concern of this time, and the 49er was even shown to be shivering and having a heavy cough. Those are both symptoms. It doesn't matter. We'll just go with the cholera thing, I guess. But Dr. Crusher believes what's really going on is that the aliens have a taste for human neural energy, and so they use time travel to head back and steal it from the dying so as not to rouse suspicion. Because one of the first things that anybody would do if they had the power to bend space and time to their whim is to go and get something to eat. First stop, Crystal Pepsi. But the Enterprise crew has far more pressing concerns. There is a threat to their only hope of completing this mission.
Yes.
1 o'clock on a Thursday. I'm sure I made it clear to you that the rent is always due, payable in full by 1 o'clock on Wednesdays.
No, my history book never mentioned that San Francisco was originally a colony for people with silly voices. They're working on a big performance, they claim, but Mrs. Carmichael's going to throw them out if they don't pay the rent. Now, I'm even less familiar with the theater, but I think this trope means that about half of our main characters have HIV and one of them is an anarchist. Meanwhile, Twain has convinced the bellhop that he needs to snoop around Data's place and gets shown the machine. And he's very excited with it, poking it with his cigar several times as most men who love science would do. If you don't know, Mark Twain was actually a friend of Tesla. Here's a photo of Twain fucking with one of the thousands of things that Tesla invented every day that could kill you. In fact, and I'm not kidding, Tesla was working on some kind of horrible weapon, and Twain suggested that when he finished it, Twain himself could sell it to various governments. That has nothing to do with the plot. I just think the image of Mark Twain selling death rays is its own reward. Anyway, while Mark Twain is poking it with his cigar, the bellhop wants to talk about having Twain write the story of his life, but Twain tells him that if he has a story to tell, he should be the one to write it. And so we reveal that the bellhop is actually Jack London, writer of books that my wife loves, like Call of the Wild and White Fang, and other stuff like The Unparalleled Invasion, the story of the Western nations handling the menace of the ever-expanding Chinese with a genocidal war of germ warfare, followed up by a systematic execution of the survivors, all of which was provoked by the fact, and he writes this without a trace of irony, the Chinese were intruding on Asian colonies that had been conquered by the Western nations. And that's intolerable.
You don't come off in that story as well as you think you do.
So with Jack London out of the picture, Twain is again free to poke the device with his cigar some more, until he finally finds something interesting and pulls it out, and just in time to show us that the only thing sillier than the way Mark Twain talks is the way that he moves in a hurry. He hides in the closet while Guinan explains to Data that she's tracked down the cave where his head will be found, but it's in a mine shaft that's on an army base, so that's going to be a problem. Data's musings that the component he notices is missing will be highly toxic to anyone touching it, well, gives Mark Twain away.
Shame on you, Mr. Clemens, shame.
Oh, that's giving him the business. Last time I asked if somebody had done the definitive Twain that was the template many other actors turned to. And you answered, thank you. Hal Holbrook was indeed that man. Hey, it's not my fault I didn't know. If he'd had a robot next to him, that I would have been aware of. Anyway, his performance is pretty interesting to see, actually, and pretty much exactly what I was expecting to find. His voice is slightly pitched, and he's slightly theatrical. I say that's what I expected because of a phenomenon that Trek fans are going to especially be familiar with. It's the impression of an impression. Captain Kirk, for instance. Everybody knows how Captain Kirk sounds, right? Captain's log, stardate 4297.2. We must find the Klingons right now, Mr. Spock. That's universally recognized, and yet it is a completely inaccurate impression of how Captain Kirk actually talked. Now, God knows Shatner has his tics. I still can't help but laugh whenever I see that gesture of his near the end of Star Trek the Motion Picture, where he has to pause and get himself into that cliche position to deliver his line. But the impression everybody knows is really just an impression of other people doing an impression of Captain Kirk. And it's my observation that every time you do an impression, you tend to subconsciously overemphasize mannerisms because they're the things you have to be most conscious of. Those little verbal differences you have to make sure come through in your performance, so you have to hit them a bit harder. So when you do an impression of somebody else's performance that's already an interpretation of somebody else, the little things are going to get blown out of proportion. You know, it's why just about every Bill Cosby impersonation is instantly recognizable and totally ridiculous. Oh, Theo doesn't listen to some rap music. He eats the Jolo pudding pop. This is what's going on with Twain and why his performance is grating for many, myself included. It's not a character. It's a caricature. Sure, you might find it endearing, and to each their own. Because I'll admit that if all he had was the cameo with Guinan's introductory scene, I probably would have liked it. But making him a major player in Part 2 hurt the episode. First, because it waters down the story. We already have Data's head to resolve, the aliens, and the Picard-Guinan connection. Adding a fourth item to that waters down the others so much that they just don't get sufficient screen time. But also, the Twain character is overexposed so that the problems become all the more obvious and indeed obnoxious. Like, take his performance here. He's denouncing what Data and Guinan are doing, but he doesn't talk like a human being. He monologues. And again, that's probably because Holbrook's performance was a series of Twain essays. It was a monologue. The problem is that doesn't work so well when you're supposed to be talking to people.
Where in Switzerland did you say you were from, Mr. Data?
I am French, sir, not Swiss.
Oh, yes, that's right. Now I remember a Frenchman. With a talent for poker, from what...
Not to mention that it didn't sound like someone was giving the penguin analingus. Wah! Use a little more tongue! Wah, wah! Twain has been following Data around, unobserved, of course. I mean, obviously a man in a bright white suit who moves like Long John Silver trying to stomp on a cockroach would be a master of stealth. Meanwhile, Picard has set up devices in the plague area of the hospital so that Crusher can detect the aliens while she's posing as a nurse there. Our heroes manage to get the cane away from the aliens, but then they vanish. Luckily, Data's whatchamadoodle picks it up, and he goes to where they are with a stagecoach so that when they're running away from the police, they have a way to get away. Very thoughtful of him. They take it back to the apartment to study by shooting it with a phaser, and figure out that it requires whatever's making the cave radioactive in order to focus it into an actual magic time door. But first, how about an interruption from the landlady to come back and be placated by getting a role in that play, huh? Doesn't that sound good?
What? Jealous Oberon? Fair is, skip hence.
Yeah, lucky thing that we went to the deadbeat apartment instead of Data's paid-in-full apartment. Otherwise, we might have had to skip that hilarious gag for exploring the 4 frickin' plots that we already have in this episode. For instance...
Do you know me?
Very well.
Do I know you?
Not yet. But you will.
Another interesting aspect of time travel. You get to meet for the first time twice. Twain hears from the reporter about Data's accomplices and plans to foil their evil plan, so it's time for everybody to converge in that cave. Whatever the obstacles from before were about getting inside seem to have evaporated off screen because our heroes are inside with Guinan already, checking everything out, and then they're soon ambushed by Mark Twain, who comes in with a revolver. I guess it wasn't high security. Either that or they just figured, hell, Mark Twain, firearms, the only way this thing could be any more American is if he was dressed as Captain America and was carrying a fast food bag. That gun and that watch are obviously the things that are going to be found in the cave 500 years from now. But in the here and now, it's kind of important as he's pointing at them to make them come with him to go see the authorities. Because they're wanted by the police now for attacking a cop on their way out of the hospital. So he actually has a reason that he can act against Data. Before now, he was just a crazy old man following a foreigner around because he seemed foreign. And that's not a crime, except in certain parts of Mississippi, of course. But the aliens materialize inside the cave and try to get the cane. Now legs sprout out the side and start scurrying around the cave. No, wrong review, sorry. There's another time door thing, and one of the aliens heads through, and Picard orders his people to follow them, and Mark Twain figures what the hell, he might as well run through also. So now we have a bit of a problem with a late 19th century humorist underfoot.
Werewolf.
Okay, between Data's ejection seat head and Mark Twain calling Worf a werewolf, I'm starting to warm up to the humor of this piece, intended or otherwise. In fact, really, the second half of Part 2 is when the episode really picks up. Picard is left in the past to care for Guinan, while in the present, Riker wants to know what the hell he should do, but Guinan won't talk for fear of her information affecting Riker's decision and winding up making things worse. And Troy gets stuck with Mark Twain.
Well, that's the problem I see here. All this technology only serves to take away life's simple pleasures. You don't even let a man open the door for a lady.
Well, since it's her fault that the cane was lost to the aliens during the ambush, and that caused all this, well, that's no less than she deserves, really. If you can mentally tone down Twain's histrionics to a mere manic bellowing, it's an interesting perspective, his take on the Federation, I mean. He's skeptical of their claims to be harmless explorers when this is clearly a military ship with weapons, making comparisons to Spanish conquistadors, and trying to see what the dirty heart is that exists out of sight that people won't talk about. But after enough talking, he seems willing to at least consider the possibility that the kind of corruption that he knows, based on racism, sexism, and the powerful standing atop the poor, may really be gone. Just don't ask to help with an exploding volcano. So in no time, Geordi's patched up Data's 500-year-old head and duct-taped it back onto his body, but they're still missing the giant key to stick in his back and wind up to make him work again. So while Geordi's looking for a rabbi to write a scroll to stick in Data's mouth, we have a chance to talk to the alien nurse who's losing her disguise. The answer to this question, why are they doing this, is finally revealed, and it's, they need to. Hope that answer was worth the trip.
We need your energy.
But perhaps we can find a substitute.
No. There is none.
Well, that settles that, I guess. So, what happened? Obviously, you did not evolve requiring only human neural energy to survive. So, what was it? Was there some kind of catastrophe? Did your natural food source disappear? Are you the last survivors of a planetary calamity? Are you a distant colony, unable to reach or contact home?
What? Jealous? Oberon?
Alright, yeah, no time for that. We have more important things to worry about than the motivations of the bad guys. So Riker wants to know what the hell to do, and no one is giving him the answers he wants.
I'll take that risk.
Sir, permission to speak frankly.
Go ahead.
Get your head out of your ass.
Worf points out that these incursions are a threat to the Federation. We should nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Except Picard was told by the alien that any attack would only make the time stuff even worse, destroying Earth, which would probably also qualify as a threat to the Federation. Let's get back to Ichabod Crane.
I don't get it. I don't understand why this isn't working.
Well, just a thought, but perhaps half a millennium of being crapped on by bats wasn't the best thing for the most sophisticated piece of technology ever built. After a bit of looking, Geordi finds an iron filing inside of Data's head, setting up for Picard to pick up poor Yorick and start poking it with an iron filing. When Data finally gets switched on, he has a message stored in his memory from Picard telling them not to fire. They need to detect the torpedoes to punch those aliens right in the tech hole. But rescuing Picard is going to be a problem. It's only stable enough to let one person through at the moment, so how are we going to solve this problem?
And I have the perfect solution for you. I'm the one who should return to the 19th century and remain there so your captain can return here.
Dear God, yes. Fine. Shut up and go.
There's a risk. We're not sure how stable the rift will be.
There's risk in everything.
Yeah, I'm willing to take it. If you can see past this performance, the character completes his arc when he thanks Data for letting him to see this optimistic future. His speech when we had first met him was essentially that mankind has nothing to be proud of. His glimpse of the future has changed his mind. It's a journey that has shown him the wonders of the universe and allowed him a small bit of optimism to blossom in the heart of an old cynic. Now don't let the space-time continuum hit you in the ass on the way out. So he delivers it to Picard, who wants to make sure Guinan is cared for, also to pay Mrs. Carmichael for her antics. I mean, the rent. Now, time to return to the present.
Fire.
Torpedoes away, sir.
Sir, I'm detecting a temporal distortion on the surface. And human life signs.
Oops. Well, Picard gets beamed up in time for the place to go kablooey. There's a brief coda where Picard and Guinan share a look, and Mark Twain gets to leave Data's head in the cave. The end. Post-episode follow-up. Damn you, Star Trek, for making me do this. Annoying character goes to Samuel Clemens for a performance that sought to turn the man into the Neelix of American literature. Final score for Time's Arrow in its entirety, ready for the controversy, 5 out of 10. I think as a single episode it would have been a classic. Forcing it to be 2 placed more pressure upon it. Pressure it just couldn't live up to. There was too much going on to give it any of the depth that it really deserved, which is a shame because the potential really is there. The time travel stuff is smart. I mean, the only paradox in the whole thing is the fact that the loop begins because of finding Data's head. And that's an acceptable paradox. And part 1 mostly handled things. The only real misstep, I think, was Guinan and Twain for that matter, just seem readily accepting the idea that Data is from the future. I mean, Guinan doesn't question it at all, and Twain seems to swallow the whole thing for really no reason. I mean, the man wrote a book recently about a time traveler, and then somebody shows up nearby claiming to be a time traveler. He just buys it? Anyway, besides that, the cliffhanger really wasn't terribly strong. But once we got into part 2, there was so much stuff that had been set up by part 1 that it just couldn't handle all of it. The aliens were so creepy in part 1. In part 2, they're barely present. They're easily thwarted, and they provide next to no background to justify their presence, and then they're just annihilated by a crew that has debated in the past over whether or not to kill things like the crystalline entity. We have to defend ourselves, obviously, and if it's us or them, I'm always going to pick us 10 times out of 10. But the way that they seem to be so casually murdering these things, which might very well be the last remnants of entire species, that's just kind of shocking for these people. The Picard-Guinan stuff is nice. I liked that shared look at the end without the need for dialogue. That really not only described their relationship, but I think showed a great deal of confidence in the performers, that the writers felt they didn't need to put anything down there. And yet, I can't help but feel that there should have been more to this, that there was potential that just wasn't tapped. And about the Twain performance, this is a sign of how acting can kill a script. Twain is like someone scratching your back who just doesn't know when to stop. So it goes from pleasing to irritating to agonizing. A lot of Data's bits do work, though, and for the most part, the failure I see in the episode is that it was too ambitious. It probably really needed a third episode to explore that stuff, and more importantly, to make these aliens the menace that demands so brutal an end. I mean, just think about this. How can you take shape-shifting monsters that are consuming human souls in centuries past and make that boring? You didn't make them sympathetic, and you didn't make them horrors. You made them a checkbox that needed to be ticked off in order to reach the end credits. Still, there's enough positives in my view to outweigh the negatives. It's got some brains and some fun here and there, but it's fitting 10 pounds of fertilizer into a 5-pound bag, and delivered to you by a man who sounds like a parrot.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
Whoa! Hey!
Ow.
Are you all right?
I believe I have overexerted myself.